taking that story, not the stop and frisk so much as the permanent unemployment, how do you embed it in what strikes me as the great, amazing story of the last 15 years, which is a profound change in the nature of capitalism? I mean, when Marx was writing about the underclass and so forth, they needed all those poor people to work in factories. And they needed them educated just enough, and not anymore, that they would work, that they could have an incredible supply of people working in factories. And the nature of capitalism in the United States and in the developed world is changing dramatically, that there is, in fact, it's not an accident that there's, in effect, and by the way, the real number is 25%. Right. It is not an accident that 25% are unemployed just because something's wrong with the way it's working. This is the way capitalism is now working. And I don't think there has been a time in history, and this is news, by the way, this is brand new, where capitalism had no use for 25% of the population. And by the way, this is why budgets are cut back on schools. It's not that they aren't educated so they can't get jobs. There are no jobs for them anyway, and capital is going to be damned if it's going to educate people they have no use for. And so the schools get lower and lower. He gets all this.
Yeah, have you read my stagnation column?
No, I haven't.
No, because I have this. I've been talking about this politically comedy phenomena, particularly. And Andy Stern said it at the New School the other day, the founder of the Service Employees International Union. We're in this third industrial revolution that Americans haven't really come to understand, which is the United States is really kind of like a third world platform. What's happened is now, it's not accidental, US multinationals laid off millions of people in the United States, hired people overseas. There's now $1 trillion in totally legal US multinational profits sitting offshore, waiting to be repatriated into the United States. Currently would be taxed at a 35% tax rate. They want to have a tax holiday like they did in 2004, where it would be 5.4%. And then they will, so what's happened in essence is you have this circumstance where capital flight, and that's why when people say, well, we don't want to tax the rich because they might leave, well, their bodies are here, but in many cases, these corporations have already left. And so you might find this interesting, but when we talk about the economy and even local economic development stories, that's an awareness that's in our newsroom that I don't think is in other newsrooms. And it's something I can talk about on Brian Lair that...
Yeah, but we need to be able, and it's great when you talk about on Brian Lair, but we need to get it, I mean, another way of phrasing the story, as somebody who covered, I was the New Yorker's correspondent in Poland during Solidarity, during martial law, during what happened in 1989, and the thing I watched, the macro story I watched was that how capitalism defeated communism in the Eastern Bloc. And I wasn't paying attention to the fact that at exactly the same time, capitalism defeated democracy in the United States. And so the two major alternatives to capitalism were both simultaneously being defeated, and we've covered the one very well, and we have completely ignored the other.
Well, this cries out for consistently good reporting then, doesn't it? And speaking as a listener...
But also connecting the dots. That's the important thing.
Sorry?
Connecting the dots.
Exactly.
You could have wonderful reports
that's what I mean.
that you do, and then on Brian Lair, you're able to connect the dots, but somehow to connect them in the news hole is also an interesting problem.
And the listener would want to know, this listener would certainly want to know, under the definition of news as news that we need, are we going to get from the media as it's currently constructed any kind of explanation along the lines of what you've just been talking about, exploding some of the myths that are somehow still retailed by the mass media? What is a newsroom's responsibility here? Have you got to do the explaining as well as the reporting of the supposedly new stuff?
I would argue, and I completely forlorn fatalism, that the newsroom's responsibility is the creation of citizens. And that is basically, I mean, you are, that's the fight you're putting up, and it is a fight that's related to what happens here, which is why NPR is under such attack, parenthetically. But it's extremely, It reminds me a little bit of the function of political theory. I mean, the word theory in Greek was about vision, seeing, clear seeing. And there needs to be, and absolutely Brian Lara creates a space for it, but there needs to be more occasions for, okay, we've heard this and this and this, how does this fit together? What is the vision that could help us understand all these disparate things? And so that's a challenge too.
I think also creating, we did something here, Brian had, when the fall of Mubarak occurred, that was a circumstance where he was in a space like this. I don't know if you heard that program, but we reached out to a very diverse group of individuals, and what I liked about it was very intergenerational. So it was young, old, elderly, senior, middle-aged, people who'd lived through revolutions and the morning after revolutions in all different settings were in this room, and we were watching the events unfold, and people in Egypt were plugging in and interacting, and there was this conversation, this much broader conversation about what this moment meant, its potentiality, its danger. So there is a kind of, and what we've been doing with crowdsourcing, and even being out in the community, and I cannot tell you how gratifying it is. I went to this event where Michael Grimm, Republican congressman, had kept a promise. He, of course, has a comfortable district of Staten Island, but also a piece of Brooklyn. He made a promise to go to Brooklyn. And it's a lot after starting at 4 o'clock in the morning to go out to Brooklyn at 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night. But I knew that this was going to be an important flashpoint because he was coming back as a freshman to a room of really well-informed people. I mean, 120 senior citizens who watch C-SPAN, smart as a tack, weren't going to give him any quarter. And when they saw me running around with the microphone to get what they had to say, a couple of things happened. One is I learned, because the collective wisdom in the room was bigger than my own. But it also gave them the sense that what they were doing was really important. And I think that's what we need to do more of. And that's what's exciting about this platform, is the ennoblement of the civic space by respecting it and going out there. And often, you're not going to say anything. You're just going to be there trying to bring this information back and make sure that people have a space where they can express themselves and interact directly. Because what's happened with the political process now is more and more you get in these circumstances, especially after Citizens United, where these are professional advertising operations where you can't even get close to candidates. Or if you do get close to candidates, there's a transaction involved that the listener never sees, where they ask you for the questions before. And depending on how you ask the questions, you don't get the opportunity to ask a question again. So the only way to shake that loose is to be out and about and open the space up. And I think we're doing that. We need to do more of it, though.
Another kind of wide angle, I'm sorry I'm giving you all this wide angle stuff, but it seems to me in a way that I can't remember it being this bad, that the American political system is has become incapable of generating a conversation about issues in a way that you can then have an election and decide. So that at a moment when, for example, 70% in all the polls say that people want universal health coverage, that's what they want. The political system, and that includes parenthetically, because the political system leads the media system, doesn't offer that as an option. You know, that was not one of the options.
Well, doesn't the media have the media have a really awesome responsibility?
Well, but very, very quickly what happened was on day one, Obama, who, I mean, this is just to use this as an example of an issue, and by the way, I'll step back one step and say that the way in which capitalism defeated democracy in America was the takeover of the Democratic Party by the finance system, which was a Clinton move. You know, so the Democratic Party became the party of finance, the Republican Party became the party of something else, but nobody was the party of anything that wasn't one of those two things. And in any case, what happens is that when you get to Obama, we're now going to deal with healthcare, and the first meeting he has is with pharmaceuticals and insurance industries and says, we won't bother you, at which point there's no reason for that's been taken off the table, so the media can't cover that anymore. And suddenly There's no election where you can vote and have it, you thought you just voted for this and it turned out not to be what you voted for, and then it's no longer on the table. And then we have insane conversations on Brian Lair and other places about this particular aspect of this and this particular, which is nothing I'm interested in and nothing I have any passion about.
Well, I think that that's been driven by what's happened to the commercial side, watching how, whether it be MSNBC or Fox, that it's personality driven in the sense that, and it's very inexpensive and very profitable to produce in the sense that you take individuals who are absolutely furious at each other and you throw them in a soundstage and then you just see what happens, and then that's political discourse. And I think people tire of it. I think what's fascinating, the latest Arbitron numbers bear this out, and the trades are starting to pick this up, is you might find it interesting, but actually Rush Limbaugh's numbers are slipping. There's actually now,
and Glenn Beck's already have.
There is a national reconsideration where both NPR's numbers, someone like Michael Shmershkanish, who's kind of like in the middle, these individuals are coming into ascendancy and they're being either 1, 2, or 3 in the market. So it's kind of like America had a hangover with this stuff, this really angry, because you can't listen to it forever. Just as a practical matter of sustaining one's soul, you just can't do it forever. And so I do sense that there's a moment, an opportunity where it's coming back in our direction. I think the fact we're sitting here in this marvelous space, we're having this fabulous, I started with a radio station. I mean, you have to understand, when I was at 1 Center Street and I was working late, the rats would come out at night. It was like the beginning of Nutcracker, okay? I mean, like the absolute, I mean, I love the municipal building, but asbestos, things falling down. Friday night was me and one other person. So in a few years, because of the generosity of the public and the vision of the leadership here and the product, we're here. So I'm feeling positive, but your point is well taken that this political process and co-option that's happened, I mean,